Before we get started with what I can only assume is an episode of Restless filled with audible gold, I need to remind you that this is the season to buy. And what better to buy than a Restless book? We've got 2 books available if you haven't bought them already. First up is The Deacon of God, now for the first time available in a paperback edition. In this book, Matt and I compiled what historical Reformed confessions had to say about the civil government, and we tried to provide some study questions as helpful guides for you as you read them. Secondly, you can still get my book, 77 Times, Reflections on Forgiveness. Both of these are available if you go to therestlesspodcast.com, or if you prefer, you can just go straight to Amazon and search for either. Now let's get back to the podcast.
This is Winsome Winter. Welcome back to the Restless podcast. I am your host, Matt. I am joined by Pastor Michael. It is winter, Michael. I had a lentil stew to keep myself warm. You know, baby, it is cold outside. Not like the song, though. Not like the song at all. Michael, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. I feel the cold. Doing chores on the farm is a little bit more difficult when it's cold out, but it's a good, refreshing thing to do in the morning. And I feel particularly winsome today. So I hope we have a particularly winsome time.
That's really good. We will see if we can stay winsome for an entire broadcast. That is yet to ever probably happen. But you know what? Today's a great day because it is actually Winsome Winter in July, because we are joined by Paul. No, not that Paul. The other Paul. The other Paul of the Sydney Anglicans, who is we'll let him tell you about himself. Paul, welcome to the show. We are excited to get to talk to you today.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for having me. I love that you're the first. I can't believe it. You're like the first guys, like in a video period, whether it's an interview, whether it's a reaction, anything, to like mention, not verbatim, but like almost exactly my OG catchphrase, not the Paul who wrote most of your New Testament, the other Paul. So right. I'm happy about that. I'm super appreciative about that.
Great.
We're happy to have you. Tell the audience who you are, and we can tell them why we were excited to have you specifically, since you didn't write the New Testament. Given
oath. Well, I might as well have, let's be real. But the reason, who I am, in a nutshell, as you gents said, is I'm an Anglican, specifically in the Sydney Anglican Archdiocese here in Australia. Haven't been for too long, actually. And in fact, for most of my life, I have actually been Pentecostal. And even to this day, I still maintain charismatic beliefs in many respects. And like very little have I actually shaved off from that since I became Anglican. And so that was the vast majority of it. Originally, when I was searching for a new church, because there's a whole story behind the period in 2021 and early 2022 when I was searching for a church, my ideal was actually to go Presbyterian, believe it or not. But I only ended up going to this specific Anglican church I go to and now adopting Anglicanism, not like most people where it's like, I'm going to study the different traditions and see which one I most like. I wasn't like a massive expert in any of them to begin with. Although I had some fair degree of familiarity with them, and I preferred Presbyterianism, and I actually wanted to go that way. But ultimately, this wasn't a time, especially in the lockdown period and post-lockdown period, it wasn't a time really to be picky and choosy. So, and I didn't have any problems with Anglicanism anyway. So when I heard of this church, started checking them out, and I was like, yeah, this is going to be my home. And then I decided that because I actually take seriously even as a Protestant, I take seriously the idea of church authority and being in concord with the community that you're within, willing to submit yourself to it, so far as conscience and Holy Scripture itself permits. I decided, you know what, if I'm going to go to this church, I'm going to adopt the Anglican worldview, even though I didn't specifically set out to find the best Christian tradition. And so largely because of that, we may get into this, very much largely contra many Romanist and Eastern accounts and strawmen of how Protestants come to find their theology. With me, it wasn't merely just studying these things and picking which one I liked the most. It was actually kind of the other way around. I just found this community, and I chose to submit to their traditional teachings, and obviously largely because it cohered with my already existing foundational beliefs and standards and that. But that's like literally the same for everyone. No one's different in that respect. So that was me. That's how I came to Anglicanism. My channel I've had going on for a fair bit longer than that, since around, I want to say, late 2020. I had like a couple of things on it before then, but it was largely hampered because I was in college at the time. But then eventually, end of 2020, I was able to like knuckle down. I used the summer break then to say, okay, this is the time I'm gonna get right on this. And so ever since then, I've been making content on any topic that I see value in producing educational stuff on, regarding scripture, theology, and history. And so anything on those topics, I will gladly make content on. Although, of course, for periods, I will have key interest in certain things. So the two first big videos that really took off on my channel were kind of responses on the issue on a couple of like one TikTok lady and one YouTube lady claiming that homosexuality isn't a sin in the Bible. And of course, I eviscerated them with actual evidence, with a lot of memes to go with that as well. And that was the initial selling point of my channel, and something I do want to return to, videos which are both super educational, but also really funny. Because so that I can show people I'm not just some ivory tower academic, because I hate that. But now, especially in the recent period, and most relevant to this interview, is my interaction with other Christian traditions in general, in particular Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. I kind of dove headfirst into that. Really before I even started the channel, actually, back in 2018, when I was really challenged by a Roman Catholic friend. And that kind of sent me into the rabbit hole of reading on these things. And so if you guys want to talk about that at some point, I'm keen as well. But that's how I got to where I am. And I genuinely consider it a issue of utmost importance to discern the true nature of the Christian faith. And I believe, as far as I know at this point, Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism are awful bastardizations of what the faith of Christ is, and are leading many souls astray. And so that's why I focus quite a bit on this issue above many others.
Well, definitely shout out to the Sydney Anglicans, because they are based. We give them them a hearty endorsement. Man, I think it would be so interesting, just it's way beyond our scope now to talk to you about, even some of the particularities of Anglicanism and even charismaticism. I am famously have become a cessationist, so that would be another time. But I think, man, there's just so much great. I know, it's okay. You can do it. And I will just say, the meme game on the other Paul's YouTube channel and such is incredibly strong, and so you will not regret clicking on any such videos. And as we talk, Paul, feel free, if we hit a topic that you're like, dude, I made a stream, I made a video on that subject, please shout it out for people, and we'll put links. Gladly. We'll put links in the show notes. But yeah, we are excited to get into it, because Michael, you can even speak to this. I think we are finding here in the United States, where people feel rootless, where people also, I just want to, one more thing. Paul did an awesome Aussie thing where he was able to call something a bastardization. Here in America, it's like, well, you can't talk like that. But one of my favorite things word. Oh yeah, I know. One of my favorite things about my Aussie friends is like, dude, sometimes our church goes to bars and we can say things like that, and those aren't a big deal. Yeah. On as we jokingly call it, on the prison continent, so it's all good down there.
That's it.
But so I'm excited for the conversation, because I think it'll be fun and freewheeling. But Michael, I think it's an important conversation for the reasons Paul said. But we see people. We already know. I'm sure it'll get there. But there have been even some high profile people leaving evangelicalism for Rome. We know people leaving. Protestantism, evangelicalism for Eastern Orthodoxy, right? Like, you see these things happen, right? This is kind of in the zeitgeist right now. And so I think it is really important for us to think about how to interact with this, how to interact, whether we, in an at least in an intellectually honest way, right? Actually dealing with them, because, right, we could interact with the worst of what they have to offer, and that would be no good, but it's difficult. Michael, do you have anything you want to add on why we think this is a really relevant conversation, at least for Protestants, young. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly for the, I don't know, primary demographic, although we're pretty broad in the kinds of people that we reach with this podcast, including, for instance, we have Roman Catholic listeners, and so it's a fairly broad group, but the primary demographic is probably more conservative, young Protestant men. And right now, there does seem to be a pretty significant push, I would say, just culturally, within the West, to look for, particularly again for young conservative men, to look for some kind of rootedness in tradition. And there's a lot of times where that leads them to think, well, my only option is either Roman Catholicism, which was just I feel like growing up, that would have been like where somebody goes. And even, I mean, part of that is just where we live. We live in an area in Wisconsin where it just, you are Catholic or Lutheran, and that's
right. You
couldn't
find an Orthodox, right? You couldn't find a highly educated Orthodox priest, if you were interested.
Yeah, we do have in my town. We do have an Eastern Orthodox church, a Greek Orthodox church, but it's relatively small. But it does seem to me that actually Eastern Orthodoxy has become even more interesting to a lot of young guys that I'm talking to, and so that's something that's just come up in the last few years that I would never have necessarily have expected. So I do think it's important along those lines, because there's so much desire to find some kind of rootedness, and often that leads people to think, well, maybe my only options are these two. Maybe
that's a good place to start. Paul, do you maybe you have a thoughts on what is attractive now, right? You would think no one would think in 2022 that millennials and Gen Z men are going to be like, yeah, I'm going to be I'm interested in the Latin mass, right? I'm interested, in Eastern Orthodoxy, right? That just seems counter to what we, at least is, again, the lamestream media kind of, talks about our generations. What do you think the draw is for people?
Yeah, there's honestly a whole host of different arguments and reasons people will raise for converting to East or to Rome. And I think a good majority of them could be split into two rough categories, I think, of aesthetics and epistemology. And so aesthetics would be, it's not just simply, oh, it looked pretty, although that is definitely one of them. Like, you'll hear a bunch of people say, Latin mass look nice, and look, it beautiful, it sound nice. Which it isn't nothing, but like to have that as like a primary motivator, which I have known some people that is, it's like, bro, come on, like, go look at Eastern Orthodoxy. They look nice too, but they're mutually exclusive, whatever. So that, but then also in aesthetics in a more broad sense, where they see the beauty of the order and the hierarchy and the alleged historical continuity, emphasis on alleged there, for Rome and the East. And so all that together, it gives a great appeal to an internal sense of like, there's consistency here, therefore there's true beauty here, therefore there's truth here, which is in certain contexts, when that's really well controlled with a good worldview, that can be a good factor, that can be a good motivation. Unfortunately, as I can show in my many materials and that on this topic, it's simply not the case. Rome and the East make certain key claims which are either not very well evidenced, which on its own wouldn't be an issue. That doesn't mean you can't believe them, but it does go against the historic claims that, we believed, everybody in the past believed them. But then with other certain claims, you can show quite decisively that they're just false, and maybe we can get into that at some point if you guys want. But otherwise, point being, beauty arguments, aesthetic arguments, they're a big portion of it. And I think that was at least a factor, likely a very significant factor in Bertuzzi's conversion, for example. He almost referenced a sort of a burning in the bosom, if you will, when he went to the Latin Mass at some point. And then the other kinds of arguments are epistemological, which are encompassing of a whole host of, if to be real, hyper-skeptical arguments from Roman apologists and Eastern apologists alike, where they'll try to say, in a Protestant worldview, you can't account for how you know things well, or you can't account for how you ground your doctrine, or you can't say that this belief is officially heretical or orthodox. You can't call people heretical. Something which Michael Lofton argued in a recent stream, which I'm responding to tomorrow in shall we say less than tame mode than I normally am, because he has it coming. But anyway, all sorts of arguments around that.
You'll have already done it by the time this interview
I will.
drops, and so we will link to the other Paul's less than tame response.
That's it.
That answer.
Just sometimes with some people, when they're high profile enough and they've spread, which I believe, it's not just being wrong, but active disinformation in my belief. They definitely need a much stronger response. And by the way, really quickly before I continue, what are the rules of engagement of language limits? Because, you know, I'm Australian and we talked about this briefly. If I feel really strongly about something, can I say a word?
We'll say yes. We would like to not get an E on Apple Podcasts, but I wonder, do they change how that works for you guys too? Because that's
I have no idea.
But yeah, we'd like to avoid the E on Apple Podcasts, but we are not we're okay. You know, it's
not gonna hurt our feelings.
Yeah, we're good.
Thinking of your audience as well, being Yanks and all that jazz.
That's right.
So if I feel really strongly about something, am I allowed to call it straight up BS?
Oh yeah. If
Legendary.
So, yep.
Thank you very much. I like you guys already. Anyway, getting back to that, epistemological arguments that try to undermine the consistency and foundation of a Protestant worldview. Many different forms of that out there. And so there are those kinds of reasons which will motivate and have motivated many Protestants to seek refuge, epistemic refuge, so to speak, in Rome or the East, because they have the claim of a tradition and a living church, which can just spoon feed you the truth whenever it so feels the need, which to them gives a bit of what some of my friends have brilliantly labeled an epistemic safety net. Where they feel such worry and anxiety about the uncertainty in normal human faculties and thinking, that they look at these claims of a true church, and without even very well trying to actually establish that thing is even real, they'll often put the cart before the horse and just go straight there, because if its claims are true, it provides such a great safety net. And so that's a very, very large motivator for why many people go to the Roman or Eastern churches.
That's really good stuff. I mean, we already have so many good things to jump off from there, right? The key claims they make, the possibility of a Protestant epistemology. I want to comment on two things, and then we can keep pushing. I want to make sure our audience knows when he mentioned Cameron Bertuzzi, this is a guy who runs a well-known evidential apologetics channel, who has just converted to Rome, and that is who Paul was referencing. And I don't need to link to any of that, because if you Google it, there will be 1 million posts and 1,000 videos you can watch if you would like to learn more about that guy's life. The other thing is, I think this idea of the kind of in the secular age, right, in the technical, in the Chuck Taylor sense, this secular age where the big pressure religious people feel is what he calls cross pressure, where it's this very, to Western culture, it's this new pressure people feel where you have to deal with every day the realization that I have a belief and there are lots of other options for belief, right? That's not something that actually is normal for humanity, right? Most people woke up wherever they lived and they had this belief. And so it totally makes sense when you're like, so when you're facing that every day and you can turn to someone saying like, don't worry, we just will tell you exactly what to believe. There's no other option. We'll just tell you like that would feel like, oh, wow, finally someone's just telling, like, and they have a really good big hat on, right? It feels really official, right? When they tell you what to do, that feels good. Michael, do you have any comments or any question? Where do you want to start asking Paul about these things?
No, I'm taking some notes that might come up, but they're a little bit more in the weeds probably about some of these things, some of the typical claims. So I'll bring them up as they seem relevant, I guess.
I promise you, Michael, and listeners, Paul loves nuance, loves going 3 more levels deeper on any issue.
Yeah. That's my
from what
selling point.
From what I've enjoyed with him, he has no desire to like, yeah, let's just do a flyover of these things. So, Paul, why don't we start then with some of these key claims? If we're going to interact with any Romanist, maybe you want to start telling people why you call them Romanists, in case they're feeling a little sensitive about that, or Eastern Orthodox. But tell us, you can start with anywhere you want, but let's start with some of the key claims they make that a Protestant has to interact with, evaluate.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they'll make claims about the aesthetic points and all that, although they won't be as emphasized because like even they recognize beauty claims are a bit more like nailing jello to a wall and all that. Right. They'll give the arguments, they'll give the epistemic arguments as I mentioned them, and I can go over them soon. But the key claims they give are of the more positive kind. That also is, I should have mentioned that really as a third category because the epistemic claims are more part of a negative kind of argument, whereas they do hard push their positive claims of the ideas of that Christ established an objective, visible single church that has the power to define doctrine and maintain the truth infallibly. We are in historical continuity with that. Therefore, we are the true church, and you must join us. Otherwise, you're schismatics outside of the body of Christ. And depending on who you ask, if you ask an Eastern Orthodox, you're at least one who knows what they're talking about. You're outside the church. You're not going to be saved. Simple as that. I respect that. They're actually they actually take seriously their claim to hold to the old dictum of extra ecclesiam nulla salus. Outside of the church, there is no salvation. Whereas with Roman Catholics, it's like if you're outside of the church, are you unsaved? It's like, let's see if you're invincibly ignorant or you're not in a position to know these things. And if you're baptized as well, and you're a really committed Protestant, but you're still very godly. And there's a distinction between the body of the church, like its canonical boundaries, and the soul of the church. It could be so basically loop-de-loops right. of compared to what they historically claimed. Like it's actually quite breathtaking. They should get a gold medal for that gymnastics. But other than that, they'll still claim, nonetheless, we are the objective church of Christ, and you should join us. And part of the key issues with that is actually discerning, well, what did Christ mean when he said he established his church? Did he mean something visible? And as Protestants, we can and must say, well, of course he did. We're physical people. We meet in physical communities. Of course we're meeting as the church. The thing that they do when a Romanist or an Easterner brings up these proof texts, and really this is the case, people who are listening need to drill this into their heads. Virtually every proof text, whether from Holy Scripture or from church history that a Romanist or Easterner will bring up, it is going to be loaded, and I mean loaded, with presuppositions on what they think it means, stuff that's not actually derived from the text itself. And so when they say that Christ will establish a church and the gates of hell won't overcome it, they very specifically mean Christ establishes a visible church that only exists in one single administrative institution under the Pope of Rome or under a certain set of patriarchs, by the gates of hell not overcoming it, it specifically means that church can decree infallibly for all Christians worldwide what to believe. Now, we could grant, okay, that's a possible reading, but it's not the only possible reading by a long shot, because it doesn't say any of those things whatsoever, and it is perfectly consistent with a Protestant ecclesiology. Christ established the visible church. What's the visible church? Well, everywhere that the body of believers, everyone who's baptized, the sacraments are administered, and the gospel is preached. That's the church. That is the church that Christ established worldwide. It is mystically united. And what does it mean by the gates of hell will never overcome the church? Well, quite simply, it's talking about the gates of hell in a defensive posture. That's something that people very much miss when they appeal to that proof text. They assume that the gates of hell are on an offense, which doesn't make sense. People don't grab a gate and start bashing you with a gate in a combat. But so they often assume it's an offensive posture by hell, because they like to say, oh, the church isn't going to fall. And obviously we affirm that, of course, until the second advent of Christ is always going to be the church. But it's not actually saying that. It is saying that the hell itself is on the defensive. So in other words, whether now, whether in the future, whenever Christ is intending for that to happen, hell will fall. He is not saying that the worldwide visible church and many congregations he's not saying that they will not fall into apostasy or error. In fact, Paul explicitly himself says so. There will be a great apostasy before the coming of Christ. And so he is not saying that there will not be great periods where a large swathe of the visible church will go awry. He doesn't say that. He does nonetheless promise the faith will always exist. There will always be faithful. There will always be his faithful remnant until the end. That's all it's saying. That's it. That's all perfectly permissive on a Protestant worldview. And that's among many, many kinds of claims they make. But that's really arguably one of the core ones that they'll do. And they'll appeal to other elements that they think are necessary. So Rome, for example, they'll of course say that, oh, look, Christ established Peter as the rock upon which the church is built. Therefore, you must be in communion with Peter's successors, specifically his successors in Rome, in order to be within the visible church. And I need not tell you how those are not the same statements, like at all, by any stretch of the imagination. But they often do like to act that it is. And so that's a common one you'll hear. And more particularly today, if you guys have probably noticed the popularity of the Eliakim Peter typology argument, which is absolutely
explain that a little bit to our listeners. I just want to say that everyone can see about the idea that any concept of Petrine primacy entails the Roman claims. I am an MDiv student at a Reformed Theological Seminary, and my professor said, "Oh yeah, Petrine primacy. That's probably what this is teaching. That he was the leader of the apostles."
Wow, when's he going to Rome, guys? Wow.
I know, and he was like, he's like, it seems like he basically just was like, well, he's like, and I believe that. That seems like a very different thing to say. I believe about this text than he was given. And again, this is I just want to point this out, just that it means he was given an office that wasn't an apostolic office, that was also going to be like a successive office, right? This doesn't, right? The most natural, if you're going to compare it with other parts of scripture, is when Jesus and the apostles talk about the foundation, right? That this is, again, he's talking about this founding, the people who are going to give you scripture, the people who are going to put the tradition of Christ down in an authoritative, right? In the authoritative letters of the New Testament. This is what seems most likely. Peter is their spokesman. Peter is their leader. And Jesus is recognizing that, authorizing that as the Lord, but that he's starting an infallible, non-apostolic office that will succeed forever and be based in Rome. It's a totally different thing than to conclude, this probably means 100%. Petrine primacy in this case.
Yes, absolutely. And we know for a fact, and I know that there will probably be Romans out there because I've interacted with some who've tried to get around this, but I'm growing more and more tired of granting things for the sake of argument. Like, okay, let's just say you're right for this part of the argument. I'm just like, no, I'm not going to do that anymore, because you guys abuse that goodwill so much, even if you're of the best intentions. So like, there are great Romanists out there who I still get frustrated with these kinds of things, but I'm just not going to grant that for the sake of argument at all anymore. Like, no. The apostolic office, we know for a fact that was temporary. It's a fact. Okay. Read Acts 1 for the qualifications of the guy who is to replace Judas. What is the first and key qualification that they give?
Of course, saw the resurrection.
Eyewitness from the baptism of John all the way to the death and resurrection.
That's right.
Okay. So it is a fact. It is a basic fact that the office of the apostle was a temporary one. Now, of course, theoretically, that doesn't outdo the idea that Peter et al. Could have established a distinct office that somehow carried on their infallibility. Problem, where do they do that? They never do that. The only other offices that they do establish are the bishop and the deacon. That's it. Right. Offices which are not apostles, which are never stated to be or have any level of a charism of infallibility, let alone inspiration, which in the New Testament and the Old Testament, and I will assert this as a fact, that infallibility and inspiration go hand in hand. And so the Roman and Eastern systems, mostly the Roman, because the East will actually kind of flirt with it, but the Roman system where their infallible magisterial statements are infallibly protected, but not inspired. That's just not a biblical concept at all, period. No, doesn't exist. You guys made that up. So
tell us what you really think about this.
yeah. That it's
this is the best, because this is Midwest nice meets the, like, I love it.
It is
Aussie.
Oh yeah,
Aussie, like Aussie oi. Oh man, it's the best. And so, okay,
I'm reserving some of my words. If
I know you are. It's the best.
Really, If I may really
The other
quickly
thing-
finish my point.
Oh,
Really,
sorry.
really,
Yep.
so
Then
sorry,
we'll
'cause
go. Then
I can get
so
long-winded
just jump
sometimes.
straight from your point. Finish your point and jump straight to explaining to our audience this new Eliakim argument
Yeah,
that I think it would be
100%,
good for them to be aware of, because it is new. It is new.
Yep, 100%. So point being, the office that Peter received, his apostleship, we know that was temporary, and they did that. The office, quote unquote, in a very basic sense of teaching the church, was passed down to bishops. But with respect to their powers as apostles, that was limited to the apostleship. That is a demonstrable fact. And so for them to claim that somehow the infallibility of the apostles, and even that can be a bit weird, like in what sense were they infallible? To say that was passed on to another specific bishop, because we all grant that that's not the case with all bishops. It's only in Rome. It's only the case with the Bishop of Rome. They have to insert that assertion in there, whole cloth, carte blanche, zero evidence whatsoever, in order to make that proof text work for them. Now, the get around for this that has most recently been employed is the new Eliakim Peter typology argument. And to give a basic summary of it, if you want to see the argument in its full depth, you can see the primary architect of the modern form of the argument by a Roman Catholic called Swan Sonna, S-U-A-N, and then Sonna, S-O-N-N-A. And to say off the bat, super intelligent guy, super well read, knows what he's talking about mostly, and I will get to that. And so
it's a 4-hour argument to be.
Oh
just
yeah,
so everyone knows.
And that's
it's a
just the latest
4-hour
iteration. Video. That is the latest iteration only. He has done many hours, both on his own channel and other channels, on this argument before, and it actually there is borderline a whole documentable history of the evolution of this argument. And there's still another stage of the argument in development right now. He is creating a new updated version, and I've heard on it from good authority that he's working with multiple quite at least in these circles, quite well-known Roman Catholics to make this latest version. So still not the end of the story. And that's actually the one that I intend to, with some other friends of mine, do a definitive takedown of it. But that's for later. Anyway, the argument itself basically asserts that Peter in Matthew 16, 18, 19, and all that, Christ promises to Peter, I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, so on and so forth. Traditionally, Roman Catholics would point to that, just that statement on its own, in a literal sense, face value, as establishing the papacy. And for many good reasons, that's starting to be kind of taper off. It's really not really appealed to in that same blunt manner by the top level Roman apologists now, because they know that there's a billion different ways to read that. But now, really being pushed today is a certain other alleged factor, which, if it's true, would push the reading of the text all the way over to the papacy. And so this is the Eliakim typology argument, because in the passage of Matthew 16, Christ mentions how he's giving keys to Peter. Whatsoever he shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatsoever he shall loose on earth shall be loose in heaven. Now, proponents like Swan Sonna point out that there is a very, very similar passage in Isaiah 22, which refers to the coming, or then, I forget the exact context, prime minister, so to speak, of Israel. So the vizier under the king, who Christ says to him, not Christ. Yes, Christ. But in the prophecy, it is said that he will have the key, singular, of the house of David. Whatsoever he opens, none shall shut. Whatsoever he shuts, none shall open. And so not quite the same. And that's actually one of the arguments against it, that there is enough degree of similarity that you can't really say it's typology. But either way, you can see that there's quite a bit of similarity in some sense. And so from this, Swan argues that there is a direct type-anti-type relationship between Eliakim and Peter. So Eliakim being the type, the first iteration of this thing, and then Peter, the anti-type, or the fulfillment of the prior type, so to speak, who takes on the characteristics of the type and fulfills it in some sense. So Swan argues there's a anti-type relationship. And at this point, we can simply say, okay, granted, but just seeing what the text itself says about what Peter carries over from Eliakim, it's nothing that a Protestant or an Eastern Orthodox, especially, can't adopt. Now, where Swan goes with this is that he actually tries to infer the specific qualities of the full-on First Vatican Council papacy from this typology. And this is both the meat of the argument and also its fatal flaw. He will appeal to elements of the typology which Christ never says to Peter directly in Matthew 16 or elsewhere, but which are allegedly of Eliakim. So, for example, Swan will argue that we can get the successional nature of Peter's apostolic office from the fact that Eliakim's prime ministerial office was successional. And then he will say, likewise, we can get the supremacy of Peter's office over everyone else, and thus his successors because of that, from the fact that Eliakim, as the vizier, below the king, was supreme over everybody. He could take charge of any sorts of other offices and functions in the kingdom of Israel, according to certain biblical passages, if the time called for it. And then likewise, Swan would argue that there was an element of infallibility. And this one I haven't looked too deeply into what his evidence is, apart from just like the passage saying, whatsoever he opens, none shall shut, whatsoever he shuts, none shall open, which, I mean, okay. I mean, we can see where that is. Point being, he tries to infer certain qualities from Eliakim and thus say, because we can just establish that there is a type-anti-type relationship between Eliakim and Peter, almost a form of prophecy, if you will. Therefore, we can see that what the significant features of Eliakim's office are going to carry over to Peter. And given those features, which I mentioned, therefore, bang, papacy. Protestantism can't explain it. The Eastern Orthodox can't explain it. And that is ultimately what tipped Cameron Bertuzzi over the edge in his conversion. He actually directly mentions not just the argument, but that 4-hour presentation, which you mentioned, Pastor Michael, as tipping him over the edge on the argument and therefore over to Roman Catholicism. So that is the argument in sum. Well, if you guys want to say anything, I don't know, before I continue.
No, well, I'm just on that. It's interesting that, to just see, an apologetic come to fruition live. Like now that we have the internet to keep track of things like this, it'll be really interesting to see how those things develop. But just, while you were talking, I literally just looked up the passage, just read it quick. And I thought, I don't see why I couldn't very easily fit that into a Protestant understanding of loosing and binding and the keys. Like that, it doesn't, even if there is a typological image there, which is compelling to me, actually, just, the connection, it's compelling to me, but it's not compelling to me in that it would then obviously lead to Rome's interpretation.
I actually think this is one of the more popular, this is one of the reasons I think this argument for people feels compelling, or to whatever degree it is compelling, right? Again, like you said, Swamp Sonnet is a sharp dude, right? No doubt.
Mm-hmm.
I think it feels compelling because there is such an interest in typology in biblical studies today, and so it very much feels the it is very much in the vein of things people are very interested in. I agree with you. I think the real uphill battle, this is the thing that you've already mentioned that I just think is so important when speaking to Roman Catholics. They will bring you a biblical text and say, see, this is the proof. Whether it's with Mariology, whether it's claims of the papacy, and you go, so you're saying when she's most blessed of women, you're saying that entails perpetual virginity, co-mediatrix, right? Like the amount of things that get loaded presuppositionally into a statement of scripture that they use to prove a conclusion is so big. And I think you even see it with this argument from typology, whatever degree it works. I think arguing infallibility from Eliakim is such an uphill battle for them.
Absolutely.
I think it's a tough road to hoe, regardless if you're going to say like the obscure prime minister office mentioned in Isaiah is the model Jesus is using for leading the church, right? I think that's already difficult, but the argument of infallibility, that's truly the unique claim of the papacy.
Absolutely.
Truly is. So man, there's so many good questions we could jump to here. Let me jump to, and this is a negative argument, but when I was thinking through these things seriously, I thought perhaps one of their strongest cases, and again, this is going to be no surprise to you. When I was a young when I was a young Protestant man and I started looking into these things, for example, one thing someone said, what you should do, and this I recommend to all our listeners, go read the letter Cardinal Sadoleto wrote to Geneva to try and get them to rejoin Roman Catholicism, and then read Calvin's response. So when I was I was very uneducated when I read this, by the way, like, so no shade on anyone who's like, wow, some of this is over my head, I don't understand. Right. My reason for not wanting to be Rome was the opposite of the aesthetic argument, right? I was raised an evangelical and I was like, looks too fancy, says things I don't get, right? Like that was the extent of my argument. And it was very jarring when I heard R.C. Sproul say things like, so it's like he basically said like, hey, the only reason most Protestants aren't becoming Roman Catholic is because they don't like how the service looks. And I was like, yeah, isn't that a good reason? Like I had no idea why that wasn't a good reason.
You're like, yeah, I know, right?
I know,
like that's awesome.
My 3 songs, a 50-minute sermon, and then 1 song, and we get out of there. I thought that was what it was, but
isn't that what the Apostle Paul gave us? Is that
what happened? Was when I read Sadoleto's apologetic for Rome, Come Back to Rome, Geneva. I read it and I said, I can't figure out a single thing here that isn't biblical. I couldn't see it, right? Because I was so blind to the issues. Right. And again, Calvin in his masterful response to it, and I'm sure if we have Roman Catholic listeners who know about these 2 letters, they will heartily disagree that it was a masterful response. But the thing he pointed out is Sadoleto kept saying faith working by love. And I was so ignorant of what justification by faith was. I didn't get when he kept saying, we believe faith saves you working by love. I didn't see it. I missed it. Right. And I thought that was, I thought that there was nothing objectionable there. But obviously when I was working through these things, in my opinion, and I think a lot of Protestants, honestly, right. And this is even what the Pints with Aquinas guy mentioned. Well, you certainly had to work through sola scriptura, didn't you? And of course, the aforementioned Christian apologist said, no, that wasn't really a factor at all, which was, of course, a shock to everyone listening to that interview. For me, their seeming strongest argument was their position on the canon, Paul, right? The argument they make to Protestants, where's your canon, bro? Right? Where do you get the New Testament, man? For me, that was something I had to work through a little bit. Do you want to just describe what's the argument? What is this argument I'm mentioning about this idea of the canon, right? What's the problem here?
Yeah, so this is like, it's pretty much one of the many branches of the umbrella of epistemic arguments that they'll bring, where they'll claim, hey, look, we have an objective mechanism for definitively establishing what is the canon of Scripture. You Protestants don't. You have to rely on fallible and uncertain, like cherry picking of data and standards and such in order to come to a canon. So you have no real basis for it. And so it'll be more or less that kind of thing. Certain Eastern Orthodox apologists, modern ones today, will give that same kind of argument. But it's absolutely hilarious because even Eastern Orthodoxy itself does not actually have an official canon, contrary to very popular belief. There is a whole host of different canons proposed by Eastern Orthodox saints from the ancient period, if we're going to grant, for argument's sake, that is the Orthodox Church, all the way up to the early modern period. It's a perennial issue, and they don't see a massive problem with it.
What is technically? I mean, just by doctrine, it is. I mean, the canon is by very definition open within Eastern Orthodoxy, right? Because the church could gather together and they could decide that we're adding another one, right? Like we decided this is
that's the issue, because like adding another one presumes that they have one to begin with, which is like, well, not quite. I mean, there's certain books which are like have never been disputed at all, obviously, but then there's others where like this saint may include it, this council may include it, this one may not. There's actually quite a lot of diversity on the issue, and on that one, I highly recommend. Because there is one Eastern Orthodox guy who I interact with a lot, super, super intelligent on these issues. He is like, for almost anything Eastern Orthodoxy, if I'm not familiar with the sources already, he's my go-to guy. I go straight to him. He's fantastic. Craig Truglia, in his channel and blog is Orthodox Christian Theology. He's absolutely brilliant in many of these things. And he himself actually made a video a long while ago that's simply called Epistemic Certainty. And he basically trashes the argument from Apologist on his own side that, oh, look, the Protestants don't have a good canon, blah, blah, blah. And he himself actually goes through an entire laundry list of citations of differing canons within the Eastern Communion and their claimed councils. And so he's just like, look, guys, stop pretending this is a problem, because it's a quote unquote problem on our side as well. Just learn to accept that it's just reality. It's not a problem. It's just deal with it, whatever. So with the East, when they make that argument, it's just hilarious and ironic. But with Rome, they do have an objectively established canon through the Council of Trent in the 16th century. Now, that's the first problem right there. 16th century.
Yes.
Well over 1400 years since the death of the last apostle. Now, that right there is the go-to, it's the very common go-to and really only necessary response to that argument, is that by your guy's own standard, you did not have an objectively established, infallibly proclaimed canon until the 16th century. So by your own logic, if that is a problem, the church left people from the layman all the way up to the bishops in utter confusion as to what the canon was. And we can see this all the way up to the eve of the Reformation. You can see high-level Roman bishops, Roman hierarchs, such as the common example raised, Cardinal Cajetan, who give very diverse views on the nature of the canon and of scripture. And that was okay. They didn't see that as a problem. The only time it became a problem is when the Jesuit counter-reformers made it a problem, which is a whole other thing I'd love to get into at some point. But they recognized it wasn't a problem because the mere existence of dispute doesn't mean uncertainty. And the mere existence of dispute on certain books doesn't therefore make other much more solid books uncertain. And that's a distinction that very common Lutheran distinction, which I personally love as well. And I actually recently did a stream on it with New Kingdom Media called the distinction of homolegumena and antilegomena. Homolegumena being books which are like certain, they are the core foundational books of the Christian of the New Testament versus the antilegumena, which are books that are not quite as certain, but we still nonetheless receive. But as a result, we submit we submit them to the homolegumena. That is the homolegumena. They become the lens through which we view the antilegumena and not antilegomena, not the other way around. Point being, there was dispute on the canon for all time. You can even read, for example, John of Damascus, who gives a Protestant Old Testament. And then the New Testament, it's the 27, I think most of the 27 books. I don't know if he includes Revelation, but the New Testament plus First Clement and the Didache. And so, point being, there was diverse opinions on the canon for all time, and that was okay. But as a result, it does absolutely rubbish the Roman claim that, oh, without the church, you can't have a canon. Well, guess what? Every single church father who either issued their own canon of scripture, and thus, by implication, they personally, private interpretation, looked at the historical evidence and thought, this is the canon of scripture. And every father who did say this book of scripture, or as it is written here, which thus presumes a knowledge of at least some of what is canonical, every single one of those church fathers, in other words, every single ancient church father in existence, denies that presupposition of that Roman argument. And so it's absolutely bunk, doesn't make any sense. And it's simply another piece of fruit of the hyper skeptical epistemology of the Counter Reformation. It wasn't actually based on reality.
Is there any, because I do think once if you're at all feeling kind of convinced of this, once you take the like, hey, they didn't have a canon until Trent, red pill, it feels like it kind of all falls apart.
Yeah.
I might just not be aware. Is there at all a response to this, that it doesn't matter, or I don't know. Is there a response beyond hand waving to this obvious?
As in, are you asking
by Rome and their apologist? Yeah.
As into the argument that I gave, or to the problem that this would just steamroll them as well?
Yeah, that before Trent, there is no canon list. The fathers all operate without one. Right. Is there a response to this argument?
There actually are. And I think, oh man, I gave this exact one. There's one that I'm remembering really clearly right now. And then there was another one, which, because I gave both of them. And that's why I thank you guys for letting me plug it. Watch my interview with New Kingdom Media, River Devereux. It was a very recent one on these canon issues. And I discussed basically everything I'm going to say here, I said there, but it's definitely worth repeating. because I might forget one of the things I wanted to say, but either way. The key response will be that I have received whenever I raise this basic historical fact. One of the key responses that I receive is that, oh, well, it doesn't matter because the church always had the capacity to give the canon. It always could have at some point. It just chose to do so in the 16th century. To which I say, so bloody what? That is an absolute irrelevant red herring. That you still, by your own logic, believe that, or assert rather, that the church left the visible body of Christ in utter confusion onto the exact extent of the canon, which is a problem in your worldview, according to your argument. It's not for me, but it is for you. And so by your own view, and really the cope only makes it worse, you're saying the church always had that capacity. Why didn't they bloody do it? Why did you leave everybody in confusion for so damn long? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with your church? What's wrong with your pope, mate? So the copium only just makes the argument again for us. It makes it even worse for them. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's stupid.
Yeah. So what then, again, I think the reason the hyper skeptical, and this podcast is pretty hardcore on no more. We don't allow any Jesuit tricks here on this podcast. So we're pretty hardcore, we're pretty hardcore against those, but I think the hyper skeptical claims to people today feel forceful because we live in a hyper skeptical age, right? So it works, right? Like, hey, great, you're hyper skeptical, me too, and I have the only way out. What do you think? What do you think at least a partial Protestant response on the canon is? Is it a historical argument? Is there more? How would you start by helping our, and we have lots of people listening to get this, just we'll call it the basic seeds of a Protestant epistemology, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The answer I'd give is, what was the method of the early church fathers for finding the canon? 2 words: historical method. Look through the historic witness of the church. And you don't just have to look at the historical witness of the church. There's actually other bits of evidence you can find, even from the witness of early heretics. But either way, look through the historic witness of the church, especially the earliest writers of the church who give evidence on the nature of the canon, which is the most valuable because they're either in direct connection to the apostles or in very close connection to the apostles, thus making their witness very historically valuable. It's just simply use the consistent principles of historical method that you take for granted and think is perfectly fine in everything else. All these people who make these skeptical arguments, they go about their daily lives living on our perception of the world, and they think that's perfectly fine. And even when we find an error, when we find that we or someone else is mistaken, we don't throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, it's all meaningless, everything's up for interpretation, blah, blah, blah. We instead think, okay, no, they were mistaken. Now we know the reason why. Let's correct that. Let's find out why they were wrong. Let's see how we can prevent that in the future. Simple. We live our life, and it works by the fact that we are alive and run a human civilization or civilizations proves that this works. Our ability to comprehend data, to analyze it, and to make truth claims from it does in fact work. And so all I ask for them is just, and this is the Protestant argument, just do that with the canon in history. And hey, as a total honesty thing, you're going to get more reliable results for certain books of the canon than for others. And that's partially or a large reason why the homolegumena versus anti-legomena distinction comes up, because some books are just not that very well attested, to be totally honest, which isn't the same as saying, therefore, they're definitely not written. That's the mistake of atheist polemicists, where they equate a lack of evidence with positive evidence against something. So, for example, the fact that the book of James wasn't attested very early is not therefore evidence in itself that it was a forgery or that it wasn't written by James. That doesn't follow at all. Now, you can point to potential significance in the silences of certain writers. If there was an early writer, for example, who ought to have brought it up but didn't, I'm not aware of any such silences. But nonetheless, gaps in data do allow for reasonable doubt, which is fair enough. But nonetheless, there are plenty of books, Old and New Testament, which are extremely well attested, very, very well attested within the first 200 years of the Christian faith, for example, which is perfectly fine. We rely on the testimony both of direct eyewitnesses, but then also the second-hand accounts of eyewitnesses, and even the third and fourth-hand accounts of eyewitnesses in secular ancient history. And that's perfectly acceptable. You need to have a critical eye, of course, but that's just how it works, because we recognize outside of a religious context where there is a vested interest in some to disprove the Christian faith, we recognize that even second, third, fourth-hand witnesses can and do provide valuable data, because generally speaking, humans can accurately replicate the information they give. Which again, that's not saying don't be a critical eye on that, because you can find plenty of false information, not just in fourth, third, and second, but even the primary witnesses themselves. That's perfectly fine. That's just normal human nature. But you still rely on that data. You still do rely on it, and we can do that with the canon itself. We have plenty of early church witness and even witness from heretics, early heretics, on the canonicity, on the apostolic authorship of the New Testament. It's there. It exists. That's all you need to do. That's what the church fathers did. And so if you're claiming as a Roman Catholic or an Eastern Orthodox to be in continuity with the belief and practice of the early church fathers, then you have to accept what I said. Otherwise, you cannot claim that at all.
Right.
So this brings up, I think, what comes up the most, at least in my conversations with those that are either considering a move to Rome. Again, it's just not common for, folks around us to go the Eastern Orthodox route. That maybe that will change at some point, but it doesn't seem likely to me. But as someone is considering that, and I have conversations with them, or somebody who's like, they've already done that, right? I have many Roman Catholic friends and friends that have, become Roman Catholic over the years. And one of the biggest things that comes up is that, well, Rome really is the church of the early fathers, right? Like they have a claim to be the ones who are in continuity with the teaching of the early church as we have it. So I want to talk about that a bit, because it came up even in what you just said, right? That actually there's ways that is obviously not true. But what else would you say to that, right? Where it said that, well, the early church was in holding the same beliefs as the modern Roman church. What would you say?
I'd say that
I'm not Paul, and I'm not an
Matt.
expert, but I just say I'm a Presbyterian like Clement was, who wrote First Clement.
That's it.
Love it.
That's it.
But anyways, Paul. Sorry, I just had to quick to just drop a little fun on Clement.
Man knows his stuff. That's it.
There
That's
you
it.
go. He's
Did
good.
you see? Did you see my ridiculously long presentation on First Clement's ecclesiology?
I haven't. It's on a list. I'm interested in.
You want to, because I basically say that
the work you've done. I'm interested. So yeah, tell us about. You can get into that, but tell us about this claim. But yeah, it obviously both the East and Rome make this claim.
Yes,
we're the Church of the Fathers. So, shut up, slow your, know your role. Sit down, listen.
Yeah, sure. So the Roman claim that they are the Church of the Fathers is about as truthful as the claim that Muhammad is a prophet of God. That's what I'd say to that. It is that divorced from reality. And I am super sorry to any Romanist friends who are listening. And hey, you know what? Know that I am very good friends with many of them, and I do content with them for God's sake. But we also have a mutual understanding that we think either one of us is in big, big trouble, and we are not going to mince words about it. Again, you guys mentioned how I did a collab with Militant Thomas a while ago. We're great friends, and we both think each other as heretics, and that we're in massive danger of hellfire. And yet, we are friends nonetheless, and we can even come together in sort of ceasefires when there's a greater common enemy beyond us in some certain aspect. But no, my friendships with them, and even then, a ton of my real life friends for many years now are in the trad Catholic circles here in Sydney. And so I'm very well in depth with them. They respect me, even knowing what I am. And part of what actually maintains these friendships is the fact that I'm honest with what I believe. I don't mince words. I don't try to appease them. So I will genuinely say that the Roman claim to being the Church of the Fathers is as truthful, is as well evidenced as Muhammad being a prophet of God, because they are both utterly divorced from reality. That is what I submit. You can see it on many, many issues, arguably chiefly above all, the papacy itself, the claim that from the First Vatican Council, that it was always known that the successors of Peter were the supreme ones over the church. They had the primacy and all that jazz. And of course, we know what the First Vatican Council means by that. They mean by their very specific claims of universal immediate jurisdiction, the power to give ex cathedra extraordinary magisterial statements that are binding on the whole church and do not require the assent of the whole church with it. That is the key and important development of papalism in recent centuries. And when you just look at church history, those things just do not exist and are routinely contradicted time and time again. You can see with it, for example, in various episodes, like the anathematization of Pope Honorius by a council, no less, which cannot work in a modern Roman worldview, where the Pope cannot officially teach heresy in his office, even non ex cathedra. He can't do that, and yet, at least according to many opinions, I'm not sure if that's absolutely established, but either way, he can't teach heresy in his office, and he can't even be deposed, no less. And yet, here you have a council in the early church, I believe it was the Fifth Council, condemning him for heresy, for teaching heresy in his office. And now, of course, later on, you see the Roman apologists say, oh, but there's a distinction between a pope teaching heresy in his office, which can't happen, but the pope could personally believe heresy and he could personally talk about it, which is just an absolute non-existent ex post facto justification of the issue, trying to reconcile it with their beliefs. That was not a distinction that they held back then. They did not do that. They did not assert that. There was simply a condemnation of Honorius for teaching heresy, and with the way that they actually even word it in the condemnation, this was in his capacity in his office. That's a fact. You even have the case of Vigilius as well, similar issue. And just tons and tons of little bits of evidence, both little and small, which come together, paint the overall mosaic that the Bishop of Rome and the Church of Rome was highly respected and actually did have a degree of primacy in some sense, especially in the later periods when there would be, for example, it would be like a final court of appeals. But that is not the same as an active supremacy, where the Roman bishop, you must be in communion with the Roman bishop to be in the church. Multiple episodes demonstrate that as factually incorrect. You can see the Meletian Schism, for example, which I talk about. And on this whole issue, by the way, I actually helped produce a documentary for Craig Trullia, Orthodox Christian Theology, called Who Started the Great Schism? And that's like his most viewed video on the channel now, because I did make it like a full-on doco, and it went through all these issues, how the ecclesiology of the early church puts Rome to blame for the Great Schism, according to an Orthodox perspective. Very good. You should go watch it. Point being, there was not this conception in the early church of supremacy. And this actually literally just arrived a few hours ago today. This book I ordered called Cyprian and the Bishops of Rome, Questions of Papal Primacy in the Early Church. Basically goes over all the evidence in Cyprian and his writings and in his attitudes toward the various bishops of Rome that he interacted with. And it basically affirms what you can very clearly see in what he says in stuff like, for example, the Council of Carthage in 286 or 248. I've kind of got the dates mixed up a little bit, but basically proclaiming that there was no universal bishop of bishops, that every bishop is ultimately responsible to God, and so every bishop has the right to establish what they will teach. Big council there was against Stephen, and ultimately on the issue of rebaptism, Cyprian did lose out, but he wasn't condemned for his opposition to the Bishop of Rome. That is a key silence. It's a very, very key silence. No one called him out and condemned Cyprian as a damn schismatic and heretic because he opposed the Bishop of Rome. That didn't happen, as far as I'm aware. Not a total expert. If that happened, then mea culpa. But as far as I've read, that did not happen. And there were plenty of church fathers after Cyprian who, even though they believe he was wrong on the issue, still revere him as a great saint, even in his opposition to Stephen. So point being, there is both a huge symphony of positive evidence and silence that just makes the assertion of the continuity of Rome with the early church, just on this issue alone, utterly untenable. Utterly untenable. No good reason to believe it, and plenty of reasons to not believe it.
And then you could just add doctrines on. Let's do Mariology in the early church and how it's different than the highly developed Roman Catholic Mariology today. So tell us about a little bit about the Eastern claim. Obviously, less relevant to us here in the Midwest, but I'm still interested in this. What about the East's claim? We don't have that papacy problem, right? We don't, we don't have and like you said, most Eastern Orthodox are very direct, since they are the Church of the Fathers, they are the Church Christ established, and all of us are condemned to hell. We're just a schism of a schism, right? We're a wart on a wart, right, in their mind.
Yep, that's right. So with the East, it is, compared to Rome, their claims are not as problematic. You can see Eastern attitudes of the church very, very early on, much more so than Rome. And yet ultimately, on the absolute sense, they're still incorrect, because they assert a common view they hold with Rome, that the church is a specific united administration of churches under a specific administrative communion, and that if you are outside of that specific visible body, you are not in the visible church of Christ. And likewise, they'll hold with the fact that there can be ecumenical councils, which by their very nature as an ecumenical council will infallibly bind all believers across the world to a certain belief. And so not only divine revelation can bind the believer, not only is divine revelation foundational and definitional to Christian belief, but also these later ecumenical councils. And of course, the simple problem with that, and it's a shared problem with Rome, to be fair, but it's more so with the East simply because that is their mechanism simpliciter, whereas with Rome, they have the Pope above all that, really. And the problem with that is that Christ never established that mechanism. That's not in his mind. That's not something that the apostles established. They never promised any kind of a charism of infallibility on post-apostolic councils, which if they gather all together and if they're convoked by an emperor, which is a key feature of the ecumenical councils, it's really how they arose, that therefore they're going to be guaranteed protection from preaching any error whatsoever. That's never been promised by Christ. It was never promised by the apostles. There's even assumptions that councils of all sorts can actually err. You can see it, for example, in the work of St. Augustine. I think it was on baptism against the Donatists. I believe that was the work. And I think it's book 2 of that. It's something that Dr. Gavin Ortland on his channel, Truth Unites, he's done a bunch of content on it, and it's pretty decisive. Even when you see the Romanists who tried to respond to him and he responded to them, you could see that they were coping quite a lot. You see with Augustine himself that he holds that the only thing that does not err is Holy Scripture, which is quite definitionally sola scriptura, even though elsewhere Augustine does express very high views to the authority and the guidance that God gives to councils, for example, even to a level that most Protestants will not be comfortable with. And yet that doesn't change the fact that in a certain work, he talks about everything from local bishops all the way up to what he calls plenary councils, which are called for the entire Christian world, that even they may err, that they can be corrected by later councils. And so we can even see that attitude explicitly with Augustine right there, and possibly others, although I haven't done a mega deep dive and trying to find quote minds myself on this issue. We see that attitude there. There wasn't an assumption that a council, merely by nature of it being a ecumenical council, was infallible. And the other reality that totally mitigates against this is the fact that right after the first supposed ecumenical council, that is Nicaea, there were multiple counter councils raised with hundreds of bishops in attendance. You have the Council of Ariminum, for example, which here's the thing, these councils, between the first ecumenical council and the second ecumenical council around 380, which is Constantinople, Nicaea Constantinople, between them, there were multiple counter councils, both in the local level and even on the so-called ecumenical level. You have, for example, I believe it was the Emperor Constantius. Don't kill me, anyone who's watching and they don't get it, and they find out that I'm wrong. I'm not exactly the name. There was a Roman emperor who ran 2 councils, one in the east, one in the west, in order to further solve the dispute issue after Nicaea. And those councils affirmed Homoian theology, or which basically said that Christ was like the Father according to all things, but he wasn't consubstantial with him. They rejected that language. And then likewise, the actual first Council of Constantinople in 359 affirmed the same thing, kind of as almost like a wrap-up of Ariminum in the west and Sirmium in the east. And so there were multiple big councils attended by many bishops. They did not have the presumption that, hey, Nicaea was this ecumenical council, therefore it was infallible, therefore we can't reject it because this is the true church speaking. They didn't have that presumption. They looked at councils like any other institution does, a gathering of bodies in order to solve a problem. But if we don't like the results, well, we can call another council and try to solve the problem again. So the early attitudes, quite decisively, in my opinion, speak against the Eastern view as well. both Roman and Eastern, but in this case, Eastern view, that ecumenical councils were established as in themselves infallible institutions. That's just simply not what we see at all. And the Eastern system is totally unevidenced.
Yeah, this is, I always encourage people, one of the things that made this claim of, whether it be, again, not interacting with the Eastern Orthodox a lot, although just this past year, I try to every year pick a different Christian tradition that I don't know as well and just try to read what I can about their history and about doctrine, and just to get a better sense for things. And so I did a little bit of a deeper dive into Eastern Orthodoxy for the first time. But the claims of Rome or others that, no, we are the historic church, look, we are in agreement with the church fathers and you guys aren't, that just never held much weight to me, because I read the church fathers from pretty early on in at least my reading Christian life. And what you find is just incredible diversity. And not only that, but it's not as though you get to, say, the Reformation and you have men who are breaking from Rome and saying, look, we don't care what those guys said. We don't care about the fathers. Give us just the words of scripture. No, you can read any of the reformers and they'll say, well, look, here's what the scripture teaches. And look, we can see this in the fathers, right? They will go back and say, look, we are in line, actually far more in line with the fathers than Rome at this time. So it's just something that I think if you read, just go read. I mean, seriously, go and actually read the sources for yourself. And I think that can be incredibly helpful. So we should, I think we should probably start bringing things.
Because we're podcasters, not streamers. So
it's true. We're not streaming. We will probably start bringing things to a close. It'd be great to carry on some of these conversations, and people can reach out and let us know if there's anything that they want us to hit on a little bit more sometime. But I want to bring things to a very winsome close. So this is Winsome Winter on the Restless podcast. And so we bring lots of folks on. We try to be extra winsome, and to add a little bit of Midwest nice into this Australian rage machine. I want to ask this, give us something that, in your interaction and in your study of Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, what are the things about both traditions that you appreciate most, right? Because obviously there are things that we can learn as Protestants from Rome and from the Eastern Orthodox, or at least I believe there are. And so I'm just interested to hear what are the things that we can learn? What do you appreciate most about these traditions?
Dude, that is the most Midwest nice place to leave this at.
I told you.
How Tim Keller of you guys. But I think I have to give an answer similar to, do you guys know the former Orthodox priest Joshua Shuping? So he's really good. You should look at him. But I interviewed him a long while ago, like shortly after he first announced his leaving the Orthodox Church and becoming a reformed pastor, which is super cool. I interviewed him, and I think my answer to this question is going to be similar to his, because I actually asked him this very same question. All this criticism that you give of the East is great, it's fantastic, but can you give us something that you think is like really positive that people can learn from the East? And he, to my genuine surprise, you could see me visually in the my facial reactions there, but also in how I said, wow, I'm not going to lie, I was expecting you to actually like bring something up. But his answer, and likely my answer as well, is that, look, there is so little, arguably nothing. It'd have to take me so long to actually think through many of these things, but nothing, at least right now, comes up in my mind that is a good thing one could learn from the East or from Rome that you can't also learn from a good Protestant tradition. Yeah. That is my mindset right now. Everything good about Rome in particular, you could very much easily find in a good Protestant church. Do you like the very reverent, deep aesthetics of the Roman Mass? Go to a traditional Anglican morning prayer or a Lutheran one, or even some very traditional Presbyterian ones. Do you like the depth of Roman scholastic medieval theology? Good news, Reformed scholastics exists. It's a thing. It's very, very rich tradition. You need only look at, for example, Richard Muller's own Reformed dogmatics text, post-Reformation Reformed dogmatics. That's an entire 4-volume set only on a small set of questions in that. At that, I believe it's on the nature of Holy Scripture, and then some questions regarding the Trinity, which is a very small set compared to all the discussions out there, and that's 4 fat volumes, just on that alone, as far as I'm aware. You can also find works such as, I literally have a classic work I actually found in my local Christian bookstore. I think it's is it by Heritage? I don't know if it's by Heritage Books, but it's actually a Presbyterian work. I think shortly after the Westminster Confession, shortly after that stuff mainly happened. I think it was in the 17th century. And it's a book called Ius Divinum Reginimis Ecclesiastici, The Divine Right of Church Government. It's basically a large apologetic for Presbyterian government, and it is very scholastic in how it's laid out. I really, really like it. Super in depth. Deals with issues of scripture. I think church history as well to a bit, but very much also a lot of stuff on natural theology, on logically establishing the premises and good reasoning and that. And so that's just scholastics as well. You like the priesthood? Well, Anglicans and Lutherans, we got that too. Fantastic. Like, granted, we don't believe in the kind of a priesthood that Rome in the East do, but it is still a priesthood. We at least call our guys priests, you know. So if you want to call someone father, well, congratulations, become a high church Anglican. Go for it, knock yourself out. So there's those issues. Really, the only one where I can think that there may be something really unique that really isn't present in Protestant traditions, I guess, is with the certain Eastern traditions, because I have gained an appreciation with studying the Eastern traditions, and there may be some things in terms of certain spiritual practices in the East which really don't exist in the West, whether Protestant or Rome. That said, though, that only comes about after you sift away through a lot of shockingly bad spiritual practices and prayers that the East does have. And again, I need only recommend Pastor Joshua Shuping. Go to his channel. He goes through major Marian prayers, for example, that are like utterly idolatrous. Of course, the Easterners will say, no, it's not. But if you just read them, at least with your Western mindset, oh dear, it's bad. But certain practices, I guess, regarding their prayer life, maybe the rigor that they do it, and more appreciating the reality of mystical experience and not having to rationally comprehend everything, that can be benefit to that. Apart from that, though, I have to be totally honest. Every good thing I know that I appreciate in Rome in the East is something you can find in a Prot tradition somewhere. That's what I'd say about that.
Well, and for me, that's comforting because it means I'm interviewing someone who's not going to become a Newman on us. So that for me is personally, as you guys as all of our listeners know, this is why I was excited, wanted to do this interview. Just fire, fast talking, Australian gold. So we just want to thank everyone for joining us. Definitely go check out the other Paul's channel. We'll link to his channel and Twitter in the show notes, and when I edited this, I'll listen to some of the things he mentioned, and I'll try and make sure I get those links as well. Thank you, Paul, for coming.
Can I give some final words to
yes, please do.
Can I give some final words to people?
You definitely can.
In this thing, love this interview. Thank you guys so much for having me on as well. Most of what I was saying, I have no notes with me. This is mostly stuff I have in my head. And so even though I'm quite confident with everything I've said, especially specific historical arguments, there's always the possibility that I could have misspoken and all that. And so mea culpa, I recognize that reality. So if you're going to try and do a big response compilation like, oh, Paul made this wrong claim, it's like, yeah, you're not doing anything special. Congratulations. And I will tear you a new one if you try that. But anyway, for this issue, don't just rely on what I'm saying. My whole mission with what I do is to be a good gateway to the sources themselves, and also giving the good tools and how to use and interpret those sources so that people themselves can actually get their own good foundation on these issues. And so with everything that I've mentioned, go to the sources themselves, check what I'm saying, and especially likewise, check what Rome and the East are saying with sources, because the way, I'll be blunt, the way that they get people to convert to them 99% of the time is through an utter ignorance of the sources, and through people, young Protestants, unwittingly accepting their framework of how to view the sources. And so I implore people to not do that, to learn good historical method, get good books that may be recommended by solid Christian thinkers, solid Christian theologians and historians and such. Learn historical method, learn hermeneutics, learn good exegesis, and use that to go to the historical sources on these important questions and actually find the facts of the matter, because I'm extremely confident, having done so on a number of subtopics within these larger issues and other topics entirely, I'm extremely confident that you will find the claims of the imperial churches utterly lacking. And if you don't think so, if you claim to have done so and don't think they're lacking, I'm happy to dialogue and debate you on these issues. So, yeah, again, thank you guys so much for having me.
So with that, join Restless next week when we come back. Join Paul for whatever the next epic 2.5-hour stream he will certainly unleash on the world soon. And
I am trying to make more short videos.
Oh, there you go. And make sure you watch out for drop bears.